It's the left versus the right here on Saturday afternoon. David Paterson wishing you a happy July 5th. For those of you who had a great July 4th, for those of you who are recovering from July 4th, we are happy to have you joining us here on the left versus the right. And we have an outstanding guest with us today. He is none other than the chair of the New York State Republican Party. He has served this country in the military. He has served this country in government. Just about everything that you would want to do, he has done it. I even heard that he broke all records in every athletic endeavor that he ever participated. And it is my dear friend, Ed Cox. Welcome to the show.
Governor, I was with you. You're very gracious until that last comment. And that killed the Louis, but you're very gracious, Governor. And so why don't you lead off, since this is your show? What topic do you want?
I want to talk about the issue of party politics. Not even as much the policies and not even as much the strategy, but just how the politics work within parties. Right now, the Democratic Party is really going through a certain upheaval to the point where there are three candidates who have called themselves Democrats in the past running against each other for mayor. That would be Zohran Mamdani, who won the Democratic primary, Andrew Cuomo, the former governor, and Eric Adams, who is currently mayor of the city of New York. Now, at a different time, they would all be supporting each other or whoever won the primary. But because of the independent lines that Mr. Cuomo and Mr. Cuomo took, and also Mr. Adams took, it's really complicating this whole situation. So the best place sometimes to go to get advice on this type of situation is from someone who is currently in a different environment. Ed Cox's Republican Party is on the ballot in November in the personage of Curtis Sliwa, who is raising a lot of money and shocking a lot of people that he's made it this far and would have to be considered in a four-way race a contender. So we'll look at all of that. But after the ballot count and trying to figure out who won the primary, which ended on Tuesday when Zohran Mamdani was declared the winner. What are your feelings, Ed, about the next few months?
Well, Governor, Zohran Mamdani's victory in the Democrat primary, which came as a huge surprise. Everyone assumed that Governor Cuomo would, in fact, be the clear victory.
I assumed it. I endorsed him.
I didn't assume that. I thought he had a lot of weaknesses to him. And it is really, though, a sign of a bigger problem with your party. And that is that if you take a look at it nationally, Bernie Sanders and AOC have their oligarch tour going around the country, and AOC is actually being talked about as a presidential candidate. What it says is that the leaders of the party, and I'm talking for 16 years, the leaders of the party starting in 07 and 08 were Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Hillary Clinton. And they have failed the party and failed the country with their policies in such a way that they are discredited even in their own party. And because in 2020, the logical outcome of Trump's victory in 2016 was that Bernie Sanders should be the candidate. But he was frustrated by the action of former President Obama, who wanted to anoint someone, and he picked Joe Biden, who clearly was not competent to make the run or be president. In the primaries, in the Iowa caucus, he came in fifth. In New Hampshire, he came in fourth. The people took a look at him and said, no, as much as we love him, he's not going to be our candidate. And in South Carolina, working with the Congressman Clyburn, Barack Obama fixed it for Joe Biden and moved out the other moderates, and COVID came along and Biden could hide in his basement, and he became president of the United States. And the results were disastrous, not only for the country, but for the Democrat Party. With the leaders really discredited, the activist left is going to have their day, and they're having it now in a very, very strong way, much stronger than it would have normally been in the normal process of elections.
And Ed, I think in addition to that, the fact that the eventual candidate in 2016, who was Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump, really came into her candidacy under a cloud of what these leaders had done to other candidates who'd worked hard. It wasn't Hillary's fault, but they just decided she was going to be the candidate, and nobody else was really allowed to say anything about that. The convention was, probably had the lowest TV ratings it ever had because of that. And sometimes in political parties, the minority voices will cooperate, but you have to let them be heard. You have to let them say what they think. And then inevitably, I think if they had done that for Sanders, he possibly might have been the candidate in 2016. I think that Donald Trump would have beaten him. And inevitably, Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. But what's happening here in New York City is that kind of power, that kind of capacity to influence people in the Democratic Party is not what it had been in previous years. So you get candidates like Zoran Mandani, who runs, and no matter what he says, no one in the Democratic Party refutes it, except that the people who agree with him continue to make these statements, which would have been intolerable at other points in history. But somehow he wins the primary with 43% of the vote, 6 points ahead of Andrew Cuomo, and then doubles that number when the ranked choice voting comes in, and he winds up winning 56 to 44%. And for those who don't understand, it's not that the other candidates didn't get any votes. It's that if none of them got 15% of the vote, they're not listed. So that's why you only have two candidates who were really having any chance at all when they counted the ranked choice voting votes. So now here we are in a general election, and I'd have to say, Chairman Cox, that you look especially dapper today. You seem like you're exuding happiness. You just have that effect that something great might be coming your way. And would that be that you think that with the right money and the right support, that the former head of the Guardian Angels and my husband-in-law, Curtis Sliwa, could win the Republican Party?
Going back to your observation about the 2016 presidential election, your observations were just very interesting. I hadn't thought of it. I saw it, things that were a little bit more on the surface, and that was that Barack Obama's anointing of Hillary Clinton was just a bad choice. She may have been a competent Secretary of State, but she's not a competent politician. And she was actually, at the end of that race, she was campaigning in Arizona to try and pick up Arizona, while Donald Trump was working the Rust Belt from one end to the other, talking about the lost jobs because of China and immigration, really pounding that home. And that blue wall that she was counting on just crumbled. And Trump, to everyone's surprise, including his own President Donald Trump's own surprise, he won. He was focusing with the right message in the right place. And I could say the same about Zoran Mandani in the primary. while Andrew Cuomo was focusing on his name and not really getting into it. There was no theme, no vision in what he was talking about, and he was cruising to a victory as far as he was concerned. Mondani was focusing on the problem of expensive living here in New York, that the rent was too damn high, if you will.
Yes.
And young people who were feeling the affordability problem very acutely, they registered for the first time and came out to vote for him in droves. And this is, of course, the young people in the Democratic Party. He hit the right message at the right time. In fact, Andrew Cuomo did make it clear and was gracious enough to observe that he had the right theme and Andrew Cuomo did not.
And Andrew Cuomo is a very bright man. He's got a great sense of humor. He's a real student of politics, and he can talk to you about that for one straight hour without interruption. He has that ability. But when it came to the campaign, he didn't go to any of the events, really, except for the ones that you had to go to get the matching funds from campaign finance. He didn't really speak at those events, I think, with the same passion that I've seen him exhibit before. I think, as people said, he kind of thought he had it in the bag. He didn't come into the race until he was sure he was going to win, because he didn't want to run against Eric Adams, and he made that clear. But I think, like many of us, he is right now somewhere in stunned disbelief that this has actually happened. But the reason that it happened is that the party has, in some ways, not opened itself to new voices as much as new voices have forced themselves on the old voices. And that's always a struggle in political parties or just organizations where the people who have done it for years are now challenged by the people who think that their ideas are obsolete and want to do something different. But that's really, I think, where the primary vote came. In a one-on-one in a general election, I still think Andrew Cuomo would beat Mondani, but it's not going to be a one-on-one. It's 5 people who have qualified to run in that race. And so you take your candidate, Curtis Lewa, 28% of the vote in 2021. Eric Adams got 72. So you could say that was a landslide. But when there are 4 other opponents and 100 is the number we're shooting for, 28 is looking pretty good.
Well, yes, Governor, and our candidate, Curtis Lewa, is now coming to the fore. The focus has been completely on the Democratic primary to date. Now they're going to focus on the fact that there's 1 Republican and 3 Democrats. I kind of like that.
I thought you would.
Especially when it's first past the post, as they say in Britain. That is, a plurality wins. This is not a ranked choice voting situation. This is just who gets the most votes, and it's going to be a plurality. It's not going to be a majority. And one Republican, a Republican who ran before, knows the ropes, has been 40 years. He has actually been to every subway stop, believe it or not, in New York City. He has been to every one of the 350.
So have I, because I lost a lot when I try to go in the subway.
That's what happens when you really work the city the way Curtis Lee, as a guardian, as leader of the Guardian Angels, and then figuratively on WABC as a radio talk show, working on the issues, answering questions from the public. This is a candidate who knows the ropes, knows the city, loves the city, and he is in a good situation to, in fact, against 3 Democrats, to end up as the victor.
He certainly is. Now, Let's assume for a moment, because it's possible, that he wins. What do you think would be the issues that he would want to address as mayor of the city of New York?
Well, the first issue, of course, is crime. Crime is a leading issue, and the left, having in 2018 not only taken over everything in Albany, but the AOC types in primaries defeated 6 independent Democrats to everyone's surprise, and 2 more dropped out before 2020. That's 8 independent Democrats who would often vote with the Republicans in the Senate. And that through the fear of primaries into a number of other legislators, and the party, once they had all the power in Albany, really for the first time in a century, because they got a majority and then a supermajority in the state Senate, they moved to the left. Passed criminal laws, so-called reforms, such as cashless bail, raise the age, and tougher discovery laws that enable many criminals just to go free because of a minor non-disclosure of some piece of evidence. With respect to crime, of course, it went up. It became a revolving door, and that is, I think, going to be the most. But I think there's a second issue here, and that is the fiscal state of New York.
Yes.
New York,
absolutely,
is really in deep trouble fiscally. We've been through this before, Governor. You and I have been, and it is not pretty.
Well, at this point, I have to raise my hand for those of you who are listening on the radio. And I'm raising my hand because I ran to become the minority leader of the New York State Senate in 2002, and I won. And when I won, I said that I had a 6-year plan to take over the majority of the state Senate, 2004, 2006, 2008. 2004 and 2006, I took 3 seats from the Republicans each time. And then in 2008, I was now governor, and that's when we got the majority in both of the houses, and that's when I should have retired from politics. Because, civil wars are the most difficult, and once a certain number of Democrats got into the Senate, it really became even left of the assembly, who, a lot of times, had these votes and that kind of thing. And so I have to take responsibility for a lot of that happening.
I was wondering who was responsible for that.
Now, we're going to take a break here on the Left versus the Right with our wonderful guest, the distinguished chair of the Republican Party, Ed Cox. We'll be back in just a moment. We're back with the Left versus the Right. And if you tuned in thinking it was going to be WWE wrestling today, that's not what we do here. We try to engage in conversations about what's better for our city and our state, and really to try and support those who work hard for that, to try to achieve that goal, and those who sometimes perhaps veer to a different ideology that doesn't help our overall society. And our guest is the legendary Ed Cox, the chair of the New York State Republican Party. He was first elected chair in 1944, and he has served for many years. And by the way, a very dear friend of my father.
That is true. He and I served on the Commission on Judicial Nomination, which had a very tedious voting process that took hours, and he and I just talked about New York politics and other things. And I have to say, you had a remarkable, remarkable father.
Yes, he was just an amazing person. And when I think about him, he had the quickest wit. There was a situation where my brother had borrowed some money from me. And, we're teenagers, and he wouldn't give it back. And so I waited till my father was around, and I I said, when are you going to give me that money back? We going back and forth. And he's got his newspaper up like he's not going to get involved. Finally, my brother pounds the table. You'll get it back when I give it back to you. My father pulls the newspaper down and says, hey, Dan, did you speak to him that way when you were borrowing the money? It was just what an amazing thing.
That beautifully done. That is exactly your father.
You know, with people that we've lost over time, there are these few memories that you have, and you just love to recount them. And we're talking this afternoon about the aftermath of the Democratic primary, ranked choice voting, that the numbers came in on Tuesday, and here we are on Saturday talking about it. And we'll have this segment with the chairman, and then we're going to have a final segment, which we'll tell you about a little later. But Ed,
I have to actually counter that story with a story about my father-in-law. In 1968, I was dating Trisha, and I was behind I dated her since 1963, and I was with the Nixon family in the 68 convention. And I was sitting next to the future president, Nixon, watching Spiro Agnew show up for his first press gaggle after he was announced as the vice president.
Right.
And here I am, a young guy, barely just out of college, and watching him. He then turns and says, "Eddie, what do you think of him?" What he says. So I said something that was obvious about Spiro. I said, "Well, he's got presence." And
yes,
so then the presidential candidate puts on his jacket, and he goes downstairs, and he hits a press gaggle, and all the press is all over. What do you think about your vice presidential candidate, Mr. Nixon? And he says, well, he's got presence. And I got to watch what I say.
Yes, but this was your first foray into political consulting.
I hadn't thought of it that way.
That is tremendous. So, do you think that the voters necessarily that the real race is going to be in the general election? Probably 5% of the voters who were eligible voted in the primary, somewhere between 5 and 10%. That's not a lot of people. And certainly with the type of media exposure this campaign will have, because just like in the primary, these candidates are running commercials every 5 minutes on television and radio commercials as well. The question is, will their messages get to the voters, or will there just be a collision of self-aggrandizing commercials that don't necessarily move the needle?
Governor, I think it depends on whether the commercials really touch what the voters of New York are interested in, and whether it brings them out. Now, of course, I think the left and far left of the party is much more stirred up now. I think they see their chance, their day in the sun, their chance to have a presidential candidate. Their candidate has won the primary in a huge, surprising upset, and he appeals directly to their ideological whim at the moment. They're young people who are very idealistic, and they like someone who's full of energy with a great smile and saying things that say they're going to make life less expensive for them here in New York. Freeze rent, free bus rides, grocery store, government-run grocery stores where you can buy cheap groceries. Somehow that appeals to the activists at this point, and but the regular Democrats are discouraged because they have been failed by their leaders.
That's a candidate that's in a lot of trouble, who took the time to call the chair of the party while he's doing this interview. It's amazing here on the left and the right. You never know what's going to happen next. But I agree with you, Ed. And also, I think part of it is there's going to have to be at some point a delineation between those candidates who talk in absurd extremes, who make promises they know they can't keep, raise hopes they can't fulfill, and all around hurt the process, because there are a lot of impressionable people, particularly young people these days, because the turnout in the primary were a lot of young people in this last president.
It was huge. Newly
primary.
registered people had not voted before. Look, that is a tremendous accomplishment of Zoran Mandami.
Yes.
The fact that he was able to get them registered and get them to the polls, that here in a primary in New York City, that's a huge political accomplishment.
And yet, you don't want these young minds to become polluted by this idea that you just wish for things and they just happen. What you're really looking for are candidates who can bring workable and sensible solutions to crime, drug abuse, unemployment, underemployment, poor and inadequate healthcare facilities, an educational system that probably needs to be reexamined from top to bottom. And those are the issues that might escape them because they are reacting to the energy as opposed to the substance.
No, I agree with that. And because our party has been less disturbed by this tumult, I think our candidate, Beyond Crime, is going to be presenting those kinds of solutions. Not that they will necessarily grab the people, grab the voters, because he'll say other things that are intended to do that. But I think it's very important for our side to put forward those kinds of common sense solutions to the problems of New York City.
Well, he has done quite well as a talk show host on the radio. He's had a distinguished career, and he, has hung in there after 2021. I even cracked that joke about him once when we were doing the show at Kat's Roundtable when somebody asked me, what would it take for Curtis to win? And I said, an earthquake, and he's the only survivor. And by the way, he was on this show 2 weeks ago and reminded me that he has remembered that I said that.
Well, Rudy Giuliani, of course, lost his first run for mayor. And in between, he consulted with the Manhattan Institute and got some good ideas and presented those ideas. And then he squeaked out a win 4 years later in 1993. Curtis Lewa, I say, he has gone to the Manhattan Institute and he is going to visit with the Citizens Budget Commission, but he has really, in the interim between his loss and his present run for mayor, he has educated himself by talking on talk radio, WABC, answering the questions of the voters directly and hearing what their concerns are. Maybe that's better than the Manhattan Institute in the end.
And in the end, for all the candidates, that might be the best way to reach the public, is when they call in and either criticize you or ask you to amplify on what statements you made before. So there's no doubt about that. Yes, and what I think is interesting, a lot of people are very upset by what's going on. I did a little piece with Greg Kelly a couple of days ago, and they really feel like this is the world coming to the end. It may really not be that way. It might just be a way of ferreting out how management of the city should work as opposed to how it hasn't worked. And I think that will be the real prime issue, that a candidate who wants people to know they know how to run the city. When you have a major flood or a huge snowstorm, they'll know what to do. It isn't just policy. It's just reacting to the situations that occur around them. And I'll have to say, they've got a pretty good group of candidates running. The problem is they're going to run into each other.
Well, it's very interesting looking at the other candidates. Of course, one of them is the present mayor, Mayor Adams. And he is adjusting, including adjusting his staff, that his initial staff took quite a drubbing for not being competent and doing a little bit of grifting here and there. But he now has brought on as his first deputy the former chief of staff to Mayor Giuliani, Randy Mastro. Now that
couldn't have made a better choice.
He, as a result, some very good people who had come in the interim to help when they're about to. They're coming back. They're staying where they are, and he has done what he's had to do to adjust to the situation going forward. To say, look, I'm interested in getting the substance right.
Absolutely. Originally he was nominated for another position. And the city council had a hearing, and I went down at 8:30 in the morning to testify for him. I wound up speaking at 9:15 that night, 13 hours, and I talked for 5 minutes, and they said, thank you, and dismissed me. But I'm going to remember every single one who was sitting there that did that.
Well, good for you doing that, Governor, because he deserved that. I mean, this is a very capable chief of staff
Absolutely.
to Mayor Giuliani, and gave his all for the city, then went into private practice, did very well in private practice with a major firm, and then the call came. That was for the position of corporation counsel,
right,
where the approval of the city council was necessary, and they ignored his qualifications that I'm sure you presented very well in your 5 minutes, and they were not going to give Mayor Adams anything that he wanted. But for first deputy, there's no approval necessary. The mayor gets his choice of first deputy, and he is back in that chair, running the administration under the mayor.
Well, Ed Cox has not only been a successful chair of the Republican Party, and has been someone whose voice is heard and recognized all over the city and state for the last couple of decades. But he's also a good friend who has delayed his trip to the Hamptons. Here we are Saturday, the day after July 4th. He delayed his trip so he could come here and be on the left versus the right. He's in a hurry, so we're going to let him go right now. We'll be back with the final segment in a few minutes. But Ed, thanks for joining us, and please, one day, let's do it again.
I hope you had a great 4th and happy 5th of July.
Thank you. Back on the left versus the right, the guest that I've interviewed more than any other on this show, just because he's so brilliant, also because he's available, is James Flippin, WABC's own James Flippin. You hear him in the middle of the night, then in the middle of the afternoon. You never know when he's going to pop up. But he was kind enough to pop up here as Ed Cox is riding out to the Hamptons
Nice.
now. You and I are stuck here. Maybe we'll go out and find a hot dog after the show's over.
We could do that. They probably have some left over from the hot dog eating contest, right? I mean...
But we talked about the mayoral primary and ranked choice voting and all that last time you were on. But now here we are just about 2 weeks from that time here on Saturday, July 5th. And the question is, where do you think this campaign is going? And what do you think of Ed Cox's prediction that Curtis Sliwa has the best chance to win because he'll have the money? And then it's just the 5 candidates. He got 28% in 2021. 28% wasn't great when Mayor Adams got 72%. That was his landslide. But if the 5 candidates in a race, 28% is looking pretty good.
I think it's well said, Governor Paterson, and thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be here on the left versus the right. But from the right-leaning perspective right now, I think that Ed Cox makes a really good point. I think that there's some danger in trying to totally transcribe the results of 2021 on 2025 for a few different reasons, right? The political landscape has changed. In 2021, Eric Adams was a very formidable candidate for various reasons. We were just coming off the death of George Floyd, and the way the city and the country at large had reacted to that.
Right.
Governor, or I should say Mayor Adams, at that time, Borough President Adams, was a former cop, happened to be black, spoke a lot about the need for law and order, spoke about the need for there to be respect between the citizenry and the cops and all this kind of thing. It struck a tone
on both sides.
On both sides that I think people were very receptive to. And Adams didn't necessarily have to put forth a major campaign because it was kind of just accepted. Oh, this is a Democrat who, generally speaking, is kind of central. I could have made an argument at that time as to where his positions really were and whether or not that was accurate. But I think that the comparison between the city in 2021 and the city in 2025 is worth noting because of what happened with the migrant crisis, because of what happened with the Biden administration and the way that went a certain way, the fact that Trump came in and actually made some inroads in New York City during the most recent presidential election. So yeah, I absolutely think that Curtis has a legitimate shot here, and maybe even to get higher than 28%. More than that, I think that people do this too much, Governor Paterson, where they imagine that politics is kind of like moving pieces around on a chessboard. And often, especially in the modern sense where communication is so widespread and the internet has taken down the barriers in terms of who the gatekeepers are, that it's really about passion. Who are the voters going to be passionate about? No question that the people very far left of center, or maybe even just left of center, have passion for Mamdani right now. Who do the people that are on the right or right of center have passion for? I'm not buying it that it's Adams or a Cuomo or Jim Walden or whatever. I'm not buying it. So if you really want to get a passionate coalition behind people who are generally right of center, it's Curtis Sliwa.
You've laid out a pathway that can be followed, and with significant resources, which our previous guest, Ed Cox, assured me that Curtis will have.
All right. I hope that's true.
That could make for a very interesting situation. I actually did the morning show yesterday with Curtis, and so I got to hear it from Curtis himself, how he thinks he can make this work. But you kind of hit on a point that I'd really like you to expand on a little bit, and it is that the enthusiasm minus philosophy can be a problem. So in other words, when you have a candidate that will not say that the state of Israel is a religious state, it's a Jewish state. Now, it would seem to me, when I meet people and they tell me they're from France, I don't tell them, no, you're really not from France, because France is not really a country, But somehow, just as even in reverse, sometimes as Donald Trump has said things after you heard what you said, you thought he was done forever. The way he talked about John McCain in his military service in 2016 or 2015, and then he ran in 2016, it was horrible. But when it came time to vote, people actually don't seem to get too involved with the dialogue of the candidates as much as they think about themselves. Am I going to have affordable housing? Is someone fighting drugs in the street so I can walk them safely? Is there going to be enough employment in the city at that particular time? Will there be better housing options? An educational system that probably needs to be rearranged from the top bottom. I wonder if those issues quietly present themselves in a race like this, where you wouldn't otherwise think that because of all of the voices.
Yeah, it's a really good point, a really good suggestion, one that I obviously don't know the answer to, or else I'd be running to...
Yes, you do, James. That's why I put you in here.
I'd be running to Poly Market.
No.
I'd be running to Poly Market to say who I think. I'd put some shekels down on who I think's going to win. But no, I think that your point is intriguing in this respect, right? There's so many voices right now. We're going to have the three independents, the Democrat, the Republican, even more so than ever, I think. Those party affiliations, they sort of matter, but they sort of don't, right? Like the overwhelming prevailing advantage that Zohran Mamdani has is that the Democrat thing is next to his name. So we know the majority of voters that just go in there and say, boom, bing, bang, I vote for the Democrat. That's all there is to it. Obviously, that's going to benefit Mamdani. But with there being so many names on the ballot, and with the way that people now, I think you're right, look to themselves and try to decide which of these candidates matches up with the way I feel about certain issues, it's fascinating to think that maybe there will be one core issue that drives it. It happened last time, right? It was kind of a law and order election. And people said, okay, I want reform within the police department, but I also want there to be a police department. That was the guy Adams kind of landed that coalition.
I've got to say, James, in retrospect, Adams was a perfect candidate.
He really was.
He was law enforcement.
Especially for the time.
And he criticized the Biden administration for sending migrants in here. None of the other candidates did that. He had a background in civil rights issues. Like you said, we were just a year away from George Floyd at that particular time. He checked all the boxes and was rewarded by New York voters for it. I wonder, though, you know how sometimes somebody can really raise your hopes and then a couple of things happen and you just wonder if the magic is still there.
One of the things that's not gotten a lot of ink, a lot of airtime in the upcoming mayoral election, and maybe it won't necessarily matter that much, especially because of the inroads and the progress that the Trump White House has made in terms of securing the border and even ongoing deportation things. The migrant issue, maybe that's not going to be as much of a talking point in this mayoral election as it otherwise would have been. But if it is, there's one particular name that jumps out as the guy who's really going to separate himself, and that is Curtis Sliwa. For example, Adams, I gave him many, many opportunities, Governor. I understand that he's been on this more kind of conservative bend lately, but during the time, even when he was under investigation, even when he was facing indictment, I routinely would ask the City Hall spokesperson I'd be in touch with, will Mayor Adams rebuke the concept of sanctuary city? Can we get him to come out and say that sanctuary city stinks? Can we get him to do that? And he wouldn't do it. And for sure, Cuomo isn't going to do that. And I have my doubts. I'm not even really sure, I guess, on what Jim Walden is going to say. Definitely Mamdani, is going to be a fan of the sanctuary city idea. So the one guy that could plausibly stand apart as the anti-sanctuary city candidate would be Curtis Sliwa. Now, at the front of my comments, I said that migrant crisis thing has been tapering off a bit, but it never really was a New York City issue. It was always a theoretical thing. It was always the ultimate puff my chest out and virtue signal. We care about immigrants here in New York. And then something happened that made it actually matter to people living here. Whether or not that comes to the fore as a big-time campaign issue, I don't know. But I will say this, and this is a critical point. I've talked to Curtis Sliwa about this before, and he'll say, well, Mayor Ed Cox signed a statement decree, a consent decree, and it's a sanctuary city, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's not what the voters want to hear, Curtis. That is not what conservative voters want to hear. They want to hear about what you're going to do to stop it from being a sanctuary city. So if there's anything that he can do to separate the wheat from the chaff, It's taking a conservative position on that.
And by the way, on behalf of Ed Cox, he's very happy for the promotion you just gave him. And but the
Ed Koch.
Sorry. Ed Koch. Got it. Okay.
Sorry. Ed Koch, not Ed Cox.
But what do you? The last time we talked, the last time I had the benefit of talking to you during this time, we talked about the man who I endorsed, Andrew Cuomo.
Right.
What happened to him?
Well, I mean, look, I think that the one thing you really can't pull off anymore is this concept of hiding and thinking that you're going to win a primary. So Cuomo had this big lead in the polls. So they said. I don't know who these people are that the pollsters talk to. I still don't really think we should put anywhere near as much credibility in polls as we do. But the idea was that he had a lead and that all he had to do was kind of run the clock out and take a knee, and the clock at the end, when it was 0-0-0 on the clock, he was going to be the nominee. But he didn't really do much. He didn't give a lot of interviews. I didn't necessarily see him out doing a lot in New York City with a very public-facing way. All he had to do was call up any number of news organizations, and they were going to show up. He still got draw from like a news coverage perspective. He didn't use that to his advantage. And the primary is all about rallying the most hardcore radical supporters amongst that particular base. So if you were going to go out there and win the Democratic primary, it wasn't going to be about just, Donald Trump stinks. Donald Trump stinks. I can stand up to Donald Trump. That's old news. Nobody wants to hear that anymore.
Well, one thing that I observed personally was in Harlem, the governor came there. They had a big flatbed truck. They had the elected officials up on the truck. This is kind of like the way they campaigned in the 70s. And they drive through the neighborhood, and the people, stop and wave to them and that kind of thing. When they did that, there weren't that many people out there. There was no one to really campaign to. Next thing you know, 2 days later, Mondani comes through the neighborhood. He talks to everybody, and he won Harlem in the primary. It's kind of like you wonder how that could happen. Cuomo won the Bronx. I believe he did. But Mondani pretty much won everything else by it not even being about his ideology. There is, like you said, just a prescription for how you get elected. And the more you can engage the people, the more they can hear from you. And one thing, I got this flyer, and the writing on it was big that even I could see.
Yeah, okay.
That it said, Mondani's this, Mondani's that, Mondani whatever. So I've got the flyer, and I turned the flyer over. There's a big picture of Mondani and his name, Zoran Mondani, and I realized this came from another campaign. So in other words, they were like too cute by half. By the time if you were not a voter who would have the type of interest I would have, you would have thought it was a Mondani advertisement.
Yep.
It just broke. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's sort of fascinating to watch that happening now too, Governor, where there's so much reaction and so much intense emotion and fervor in response to Mondani that almost makes me think, hey, where were you guys over the last 10 years? There's all this freak out from various business leaders, political leaders, supposedly the national party of the Democrats, the DNC. They don't necessarily like things moving so far to the left. What news or memo have you guys been reading? You barely got Bernie Sanders out of the race 10 years ago. Okay. You have every single member of the city council in New York City who's basically a clone of Mondani. So what about this is surprising? There needs to be a concerted effort to push back against the fairy tale that is socialist economics. And I hope Curtis Sliwa can do that. I hope he's honest and frank about the financial troubles facing the city. And hopefully somebody tells the truth about the idea of if you're going to run free city buses, they're just going to continue to stink. That's
yes,
all.
Exactly.
Things that are free are bad. Bad. That's mostly true when it comes to free.
I mean, that is such an obvious situation. The subway's included, the Metro North, I guess.
Right.
That's not even in New York City.
You get what you pay
He's got a
for.
plan to shut it down. Our guest today has been James Flippin, the man who can show up anywhere when you need him instantaneously.
Have microphone will travel.
I don't know how he does it, but he is a most valued guest here on The Left versus the Right.
Thanks, Governor.
And James, thanks for coming in.
Thank you. And happy July 4th.
And on happy July 4th. And now we're on July 5th. I hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend.
You too.
Because I know I will. Thank you very much, everybody. See you next week on The Left versus the Right.